Welcome to the award-winning Thoughts from a Page podcast, a member of the Evergreen Podcasts Network, hosted by me, Cindy Burnett, a voracious reader and book columnist who provides you with engaging author conversations and book recommendation episodes, as well as insider information on all of the newest releases that I personally endorse and on the publishing industry in my behind-the-scenes series. With so many books coming out weekly, it can be hard to decide what to read, so I find the best ones and share them with you. For more book recommendations and to find my backlist of interviews, visit my website at thoughtsfromapage.com. If you are interested in accessing unique bonus content, I hope you will consider joining my Patreon group. I offer 2 levels: Page Turners, which includes my popular Early Reads program, where patrons have access to monthly early digital reads through NetGalley and exclusive pre-publication author chats, as well as regular bonus episodes and fun surprise content. My second level is Lit Lovers, which includes all of the Page Turner benefits, as well as my Traveling Galley program, where patrons can read at least 3 to 4 new titles a month that are in print galley form and are passed along to other members. In addition, there are 2 monthly episodes, fiction-nonfiction pairings, and spoiler-filled interviews with 3 authors. The link to join is in my show notes. Today, I have the honor of chatting with Alice Hoffman about The Invisible Hour. Alice is the author of more than 30 works of fiction, including The Book of Magic, Magic Lessons, The World That We Knew, Practical Magic, The Rules of Magic, a Reese Witherspoon book club pick, the Oprah's book club selection Here on Earth, The Red Garden, The Dove Keepers, The Museum of Extraordinary Things, The Marriage of Opposites, and Faithful. She lives near Boston. I hope you enjoy our conversation. And now for a quick break. For the last year, I have been focusing more on my health and eating habits. In connection with that, I have started drinking AG1 in the morning. When I started drinking AG1 daily, I could feel a real difference in my health and energy levels. That is because AG1 is a foundational nutrition supplement that supports your body's universal needs like gut optimization, stress management, and immune support. Since 2010, AG1 has led the future of foundational nutrition, continuously refining their formula to create a smarter, better way to elevate your baseline health. I recommend AG1 to all of my family and friends because the company has a team of doctors and scientists. It is tested for 950 contaminants and is NSF certified for sport. It is formulated based on the latest science, and it maintains high quality standards. Thanks AG1 for sponsoring my show. AG1 is a supplement I trust to provide the support my body needs daily. If you want to take ownership of your health, it starts with AG1. Try AG1 and get a free 1-year supply of vitamin D3K2 and 5 free AG1 travel packs with your first purchase. Go to drinkag1.com/thoughtsfromapage. That's drinkag1.com/thoughtsfromapage. Check it out. And now back to my show. Welcome, Alice. How are you today?
Good. Thanks so much for having me.
I cannot tell you what an honor this is. I am just beyond excited that we get to chat with each other. So thank you for taking the time to come on my show.
Of course.
So I really, really enjoyed The Invisible Hour, and I cannot wait to ask you all about it. But before I do that, could you give me a quick synopsis of the book for those that haven't read it yet?
Yeah. It's really about mothers and daughters. That's how I see it. But it's a story of a girl who's raised in a cult. And in this cult, there are no books are allowed, certainly no fiction. And she makes her way to the library in town and is befriended by the librarian. And she reads The Scarlet Letter by Nathanial Hawthorne, which is a pretty interesting book, to go back and read. It's so much about women and choices that women can and cannot make. And it changes her life. And it's also, I have to say, a story about time travel. I happen to love time travel. It just really appeals to me. And I wrote this book during COVID. So I think the idea of leaving the time you're in and going to a different time was very appealing to me. So she falls in love with Nathanial Hawthorne as a reader and then as a person.
I love time travel as well. That always appeals to me. And I loved the way you handled it. And I'm always so curious about how an author is going to handle it, like the aspects of it and what's going to happen and traveling to another time period and potentially another world. Here, it's another time period. But I thought it was very well done. And it's an Indie Next pick. Congratulations. I always look at their picks and feel like that is this place I start for recommendations.
Thank you. I'm very honored. I was really thrilled when I heard that.
Yeah, it's very exciting. The other thing, before we talk much about your book, I have a galley and you have this beautiful letter that you've written in the front of it. And part of it really stood out for me, and I wanted to read that really quickly. You say the bond between writer and reader is a cherished and mysterious one. A book doesn't live when it's written, it lives when it's read. As a reader, I know how profoundly books have affected me. That really sat with me too, because that's exactly how I feel. I often talk about books that I read years ago that I still regularly think about. And I think you learn so much, but they also become a part of you. And I just loved those sentences.
Yeah, it's so interesting to me. I think that reading is the most interactive art there is because it doesn't exist. It doesn't exist without the other person. I mean, it's just scratches on a page until, a reader imagines it. I mean, it's work for the reader too. And it's different, like a book, every book is different depending on who the reader is. So, I mean, reading really changed my life and was kind of, I feel like saved my life as it does in The Invisible Hour. It saves her life, the main character. But I kind of don't know where I would be or what I would have done without books. And, the idea that, it's also like so freeing, especially when you're a young reader, that you get to pick the book you want to read and you find these great authors that you fall in love with. And it's just I think nothing ever tops what you read when you're like 12 and 13. For some reason, it's such an impressionable time. I still go back and read those books that I found when I was that age.
I think that's exactly right. And I think the flip side of it is the point you make in this book, cults and other groups, all the book banning we're going through now, how important it is to the cause for all of these groups to ban books because it opens your mind, it teaches you new things, and you can't have people doing that if you're trying to control them.
Yeah, that's right. And, one of my favorite writers is Ray Bradbury. And when I was about 12 or 13, I read Fahrenheit 451, and that's all about a society where books are outlawed and books are so precious. Books are so precious that readers memorize novels and memorize books so that they won't die. And, this book banning is very scary because, who's to decide, what I can read or what my child can read? I think when it comes to my child, if they're of a certain age, I should be the one to decide that. But, I guess books are very scary for some people because they do show you different worlds and they do kind of open your heart and teach you empathy in a way that I think nothing else does.
I was just going to say that they teach you both empathy and sympathy. And I think that the more open-minded you are, the more likely you are to accept other people, to be open to new ideas. And yes, that goes against what a lot of these people are trying to promote.
Yeah, I totally agree. And it's scary. So that is partially what the book is about. And partially, it's also about kind of, in a way, my relationship with my mother, which was very, I think, so many of us were so angry at our mothers until we grow up. And then looking back, it's so different. My mother was a great friend and a terrible mother. So at least I had the great friend.
Exactly. And you talk about that in your letter and the Scarlet Letter and how much it meant to you. So let's talk a little bit more about using the Scarlet Letter in this book and why you chose to do that.
Yeah. Well, my main character's mother gets pregnant when she's very young, and her parents are very wealthy Boston couple. They don't want her to make her own decisions. They want to make the decisions for her. And she actually wants to have the child. They don't want her to. And she runs away and joins this cult. And, it's a terrible mistake. And her daughter is raised in this cult. And, the Scarlet Letter is really about the same thing. It's about the Puritans, which really like a cult, and the fact that women were not allowed. They believed in original sin. They believed that, Eve was the cause of all evil in the world, and that women were not allowed to make their own choices. And the Scarlet Letter is so ahead of its time because it's about a woman who decides what she's going to do. She's going to have this child. She's not going to say who the father is. And even if she's an outcast, she's going to do what she wants to do. And I kind of took that idea and made it more modern. But in the book, I don't want to give too much away, but in the book, when my character Mia is a girl and she reads the Scarlet Letter, she feels like she's reading her own life. And there's a reason for that.
I loved that. I don't want to have any spoilers either, but I loved the way that all connected up. And, you're reading along and you've gotten through the cult story, and then all of a sudden there's kind of a different story. And so it took me a minute and I was like, okay, I'm sure they're going to connect. And so they do. But how did you create the format? Like how did you come up with that, the way that you were going to write it?
I wrote it in several different ways, which is what I usually do. So there were lots of different versions, but I thought basically I was going to be writing about 2 time periods. And so the first half of the book is in one time period and the second half of the book is in the other time period. And if people say, well, I don't know, it's hard for me to believe that she would go back in time. Well, it's time travel. You have to kind of suspend that disbelief and just go with it. It's not a reality that I know of. So you have to just kind of jump into it and just go with it.
Well, I was laughing when I was looking at a couple of reviews and somebody said you have to suspend disbelief. And I'm like, yes, you do. It's time travel. So, and if people have read your books before, it's not like you have never included any magical realism in your books. Like this is not a big departure. So I was kind of laughing. I was like, yes, maybe you don't really have to suspend disbelief because you already know it's time travel. But I love time travel. So I'm always up for those kind of stories. And to go back and to meet an author like that, like Jane Austen for me is my all-time favorite author. I have read Pride and Prejudice and Persuasion over and over and over again. Like if I could go back in time and meet her, I would sign up for that in a heartbeat.
Yeah, for me, actually, it would be Emily Bronte. I would think it would just be so, I'm just so interested in how somebody with such a small life wrote so big and knew so much. So I want to have dinner with her.
I really thought a lot about that as I was reading your book because I like the Scarlet Letter and Nathanial Hawthorne would be interesting. But I was like, oh, I'd really like to meet Jane Austen.
Yeah. And also Nathanial Hawthorne, like handsomest writer ever.
Well, yes, that's true, too. So Mia goes back before he writes the book. And so that was also so creative. I don't want to give anything away, but as to what happens with respect to that as she is spending time with him, I don't know. Your mind is so creative. I just over and over again was completely amazed.
Thank you. Well, I had to find a year in his life when nothing much happened. So I was limited, because I had to find this time period where nothing much happened. He didn't publish anything. Nothing happened personally. And I found this time period where very little happened. And so I had to stick within that time.
Well, I loved that. The other thing that was very interesting to me, because I have 3 children, 2 of which are daughters, was the mother-daughter relationships.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, I write a lot about that. And I think, partially it's my own relationship and trying to kind of understand that. It's such a complicated relationship. And, sometimes I think as a parent, you think you're doing the right thing and it turns out to be all wrong. Or you think you're doing the wrong thing and it turns out to be all right. It's just very complicated. And I think my character, Mia, doesn't understand her mother because she doesn't understand how her mother grew up. I always think you can't really know your parent because you didn't know them when they were young. And people are just so different.
And their experiences are so different. And not just in terms of their family experiences, but in terms of the generational times, in terms, technology or lack of it when my mother was growing up, and just what it was like during that time period versus during our time period.
Yeah. I in this letter, which is not going to be in the book, but it is in the galley, that I write about my mother. She was a social worker and I used to help her pick up babies and take them to foster care. And it was traumatic, I have to say. It was really difficult. It was a very traumatic thing. My mother was very liberal and always felt like, people should be able to make their own choices. I think she was a really good social worker because of that, because she didn't want to force her opinion on anyone. But anyway, it was traumatic for me as like a 12 and 13-year-old to be picking up these babies.
Absolutely. And then to understand what you were having to do with them and then hope that they're going to have okay futures, but probably never know.
Right, exactly.
What about your research? What kind of research did you have to do?
Well, I read a lot about Hawthorne's life and his wife, Sophia Peabody, and I was lucky because a friend of mine, Megan Marshall, is an expert has written Pulitzer Prize winning books about the Peabody sisters. He married one of those sisters. And so she was very helpful and read the book for me. I talked to a lot of experts and I read as much of his work as I could. I didn't want to read too much because I wanted him to be a person to me. And, he's interesting to me because he seemed like he was very depressed a lot of the time, and that kind of writing saved his life as well. And he had this accident when he was young, so he felt very separate from the rest of the world and kind of found the world in reading and in writing. And I very much related to that.
But he had some very famous friends.
He had some famous friends, yeah. Very famous.
I didn't really realize that till I was reading your book. I don't know that much about him. But I was kind of amazed. I was like, oh, I didn't really realize that he had intersected with several of these people.
Well, that's, in Concord, Massachusetts, there was this amazing world of writers, of Thoreau and Emerson, and that Alcott's and Hawthorne and his wife actually rented a house that had belonged to Emerson's grandfather. And it was, Thoreau, as a gift when Hawthorne got married, planted a garden for him. The garden's still there in this house called the Old Manse, which is such a cool place to visit. Yeah, it was such an incredible world that all of these people were writing at the same time in the same place.
Absolutely. And that was another thing that was interesting, kind of as a sidebar to what you're saying. When Mia goes back in time, she sees the world as it looked then. And so she knows what it's going to look like in the future, but she can see it, 200 years ago. And I thought, oh, how interesting to take the time where you're living now and see what that looked like sometime in the past.
I know. Would we even want to? I mean, I guess I would. I mean, I think everyone has their time period that they would want to go back to. I thought about it a lot during COVID. And for me, it's like the 1960s in New York City. That's where I want to go back to. So if I have my choice, that's where I'll go.
I think I might do the 1920s in Paris.
Oh, that sounds good.
Yeah, that would be a good one too. But I love New York City, so I would always pick a time there and think that was a lot of fun. What surprised you the most when writing this one?
Well, I'm always kind of surprised, by who my characters turned out to be. And, I wasn't sure what the ending was going to be. So that kind of surprised me. I always feel like, with a book, I want to feel like I can't wait to turn the page. And I want to feel that way when I'm writing too, even though I have an outline, I think I know what I'm doing. But as I go along, things just change.
So you do outline. You start with that, you work through it, and then eventually at different places you deviate.
Exactly. Yeah.
Do you have a set time that you write? Do you write a certain amount, or you just write when you can and write when you want to?
I do. I used to have a set time, especially when I was starting out. I would get up at like 4:45 and, right before I went to either school or my job, or when I had kids, right before they got up. And, I don't know, but now I don't know, life seems so busy that I feel like if you don't make a time, it's very hard to do it. But I tend to be writing all the time. And the only sad thing about that for me is that I really don't read as much as I used to. I don't think of myself as a big reader anymore, because whenever I'm reading, I feel like, oh, I could be writing. And for me, that's kind of a deeper communion, to write the book than to read it. So for me, that's kind of a loss that I'm not a big reader the way I used to be.
I would think that while you're writing, to also be reading could be a little distracting, because then you get caught up in this other story and you're thinking about how they've laid it all out and what they've included. And then that might be very distracting for what you're working on yourself.
Exactly. I feel like, I don't want to be influenced by what they're doing, even like subconsciously, and since I'm writing all the time, it's really, unless I'm on vacation or something like that, I'm not reading so much.
That makes sense. Well, what was the hardest part about writing this book?
I don't know if there was a hard part. I mean, I did it in different versions, so that it was hard for me to kind of choose the way to tell it and to try to just go with it, even though I couldn't explain the time travel in a way that was simplistic. It's not like, you touch the rocks, and suddenly you can walk through time. It's more complicated than that. It has to do with places where things happened, where there's a grave, where there's a birth, like these places that are just very pivotal places in a person's life.
Did you have to think a lot about that, the time travel part, how it would play out, how you would choose what would cause the time travel?
Yeah. And for a while I had him coming here, which was really fun. It wasn't right for the book, but it was just really fun to have him experience modern life and to see what was like his times and what was so unlike his times. But in the end, it didn't really fit into the book. It was just kind of my fun activity.
Was he dumbfounded by our time period?
He liked it.
I always wonder what that would be like. And I hadn't really thought about it in this instance, but somebody coming from that time period to now to be like, what is happening? So many things have changed. I mean, so many.
Yeah, no, he really liked it in my version.
He's like, I'm going to stay here.
It's time to write. There's so many things to do.
Yes, exactly. I'm busy watching Netflix or searching the internet. So I love to talk about titles and covers. Those are things that really appeal to me. And I feel like so much more goes into them than people often realize. So let's talk a little bit about first The Invisible Hour as the title, and then your stunning, stunning cover.
Well, I went through a lot of titles. I find that I either have the title from the beginning or it's a huge struggle. And I went through, I don't know, 100 different titles or something. Really a lot, involved all my friends and tried to get them to help me. I don't even know how this happened at the end. But I think when I think of the invisible hour, I think of that time. It's kind of has to do with the time travel, kind of that hour between worlds. And Mia and her mother are always talking about, there's a line in Shakespeare's work and about we walk invisible. And Mia's always wishing that they could be invisible so they could escape from this place and walk out of there. So I think it's kind of the hour when that actually happens, when you're free. That's what it feels like to me. But I had so many other titles. But now I just think of it as the invisible hour. It's funny how that happens once you choose a title. And also many, many covers, many. And when I saw this photograph, I knew that this was it.
What were some of the other covers that you looked at?
I almost can't remember.
Probably kind of like the title.
Well, I feel like if I was not a writer, I would love to. I don't have the ability. I would love to make book jackets and book covers. I just think it really is so important to a book. And I think of a book really kind of as it's kind of like an artifact, it's like, it's like a piece of art or something. And it shouldn't matter, every book should be able to have, just a dark blue cover or something. But I think it kind of expresses the soul of the book if you get it right. And I don't know, I was looking through all these photographs and couldn't find the right thing. And then when I saw this, I just thought, this is my character, and this is the place. It takes place in Western Massachusetts, and this feels like the place to me. So I felt very lucky.
I think you're exactly right on the cover, though, because I think it can completely turn a reader off, or it can draw them in. And then your point is well made that if they match up, because that's the other thing. I can love a cover and I can read a book, and then I'll look at the cover and be like, I don't understand this cover related to this book. They're both nice, but they don't go together. And it drives me crazy.
Yeah, I really have this horrible thing of, I do judge a book by its cover. I am drawn to, not always. There's some writers that I just read because I love them. But, if it's someone I don't know or haven't heard of before, it really is about the cover for me.
Me too. And I have a hard time getting past a cover that I have a visceral response to that is not positive. So, if I look at the cover and I'm like, oh, I just have a really hard time picking it up.
Yeah, no, I know. And so I feel really happy with this because this is it. This is kind of the soul of the book.
It is. It's beautiful and it's different. And that's the other thing. I feel like so many covers today are somewhat similar. It's hard to almost distinguish them. You could just look down a row, and this one completely stands out.
I feel very lucky. I feel like my books have had incredible covers. And I've worked with a lot of people who are very generous, and I tend to be involved, and I want to see the cover and, talk about it and discuss it. And so I just feel like I've been really lucky.
Well, I'm sure you're at the point in your career where they're going to be listening to you about your cover.
Yeah, because I complain a lot.
No, but I'm just saying, you have sold so many books and have done so well that they're going to want you to be happy.
Oh, thanks. Well, hopefully. I don't know, but I am happy.
Well, good. Back to the title. Is that something that happens to you regularly? Do you usually struggle to find a title, or do you usually find the title, or has it just been split depending on your books?
It's totally split. Like, certain books, like I wrote The Dove Keepers, that was always The Dove Keepers. It was never going to be anything else other than that. And with that cover, I actually found the photograph while I was working on the book. It's a photograph by an artist named Joyce Tennyson, who I've used other of her photographs. She's amazing. And I feel like, I just really kind of, her work is so beautiful. And that was of a young woman with long red hair with two doves sitting on each of her shoulders. I'm like, this is my character, this is it. And then I wrote a book called The Marriage of Opposites. That was always the title. And, that's so lucky when that happens because, it's not usually the case with me.
Well, titles can be very tricky too. And I always say I don't like titles that are just a bunch of words strung together that I have to be like, what order do they come in? What is that title again? Something like The Invisible Hour or The Dove Keepers or Faithful, which I love. Or ones that are going to just stick with you versus having to remember, okay, what order do all these words go in together?
Yes, I got to say Faithful, I remember because it had so many different titles. And its original title was Girl's Best Friend. And there was a picture because she rescues dogs. And I still have that cover. It was a great cover, just not for this book, of kind of a white bulldog with wearing kind of this bow tie. And it was nice, but it just wasn't right for the book. It wasn't the soul of the book.
Yeah, that's another stunning cover.
Yes, it is, isn't it? Yeah, I was lucky.
It's one of those that has definitely stayed with me.
Thank you.
Well, before we wrap up, Alice, what have you read that you really loved and would recommend?
Well, as I said, I don't read that much, but I've read a couple of books recently that I've loved. One is by Laura Zigman, Separation Anxiety, which is just really a terrific book. And the other one is by Ann Leary called The Foundling, which is such a fascinating historical book about kind of like the way if women didn't behave, they were often put away in these institutions and made to work. It's part of history that I didn't know anything about. So it was really interesting to me. And then I always want to read Elizabeth Strout. Like, she's so different than I am, but she's so inspiring. Her work is so beautiful, so kind of deceptively simple. And then it just really gets to you. And so I would read anything by her over and over again.
I hate to admit, I have not read a single one of her books, but I always hear they're wonderful. And I love Ann Leary. And I have not read The Foundling because I'm a little worried it's kind of too dark for me. But I love one of her earlier books, The Children or something like that. That was just phenomenal.
Well, The Foundling, it's about a dark time, but it doesn't feel dark.
Okay.
So it's kind of uplifting in some way. And it's really fascinating and amazing that we don't know more about this period. And the characters are really extraordinary. So I recommend it.
Okay, good. You're like the fourth person to recommend it. So I really do need to pick it up because clearly it's a good one.
And also Laura Zigman writes about kind of dark topics sometimes, but she's hysterically funny at the same time. So, I don't know. I recommend all her books too.
Okay, good. And she had another one, Separation Anxiety. Is that her latest?
I think that's her latest. She has this book. The book is about two sisters who had a sister who was actually also in a home.
Yes.
And passed away. It's a beautiful book. It's also really funny.
Oh, yes. Here it is. The latest Laura Zigman book is called Small World.
It's really interesting how sometimes people can take dark subject matter and it doesn't feel dark, it feels inspirational almost, and I think that's one of the reasons we read novels, right? To kind of allow us to think about life in a different way.
And to see how people deal with situations that either you might encounter or you've wondered about.
Yeah.
Well, Alice, thanks for taking the time to chat with me today. This was just so delightful.
Oh, thank you for talking with me. I appreciate it.
I'm Anne Marie Kelly. Wild Precious Life is a podcast about dreaming big, digging in and connecting across distance, division, and loss. In each episode, I talk with prize-winning writers, musicians, and wanderers who remind all of us how we can make the most of the time we have. So meet me here. Let's walk and talk and dream and discover what it means to be wild, precious, and brave.
Thank you so much for listening to my podcast. I would love to connect with you on Instagram or Facebook, where you can find me at Thoughts from a Page. If you enjoy the show, please consider joining my Patreon group to access bonus content and support the podcast. If you have a moment to rate the show or subscribe to it wherever you listen to your podcasts, I would really appreciate it. It makes a big difference. And please tell all of your friends about Thoughts from a Page. Word of mouth does wonders to help the show grow. The book discussed in this episode can be purchased at my bookshop storefront, and the link is in the show notes. I hope you'll tune in next time.
I'm Anne Marie Kelly. Wild Precious Life is a podcast about dreaming big, digging in and connecting across distance, division, and loss. In each episode, I talk with prize-winning writers, musicians, and wanderers who remind all of us how we can make the most of the time we have. So meet me here. Let's walk and talk and dream and discover what it means to be wild, precious, and brave.